Why did the range fall silent the moment she stepped forward? The cold had already crept into bone and breath by the time her boots touched the firing line. Dawn sat low and pale, washing the steel targets in a colorless light that made distance feel farther than it was. Rifles rested in neat rows. Men adjusted gloves, joked softly, shifted their weight. And then there was her. Quiet, still, almost invisible if you didn't know how to look. The instructor's voice cut through the air with casual sharpness. Let the girl try. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A few restrained laughs followed, the kind that pretended not to mean anything at all. She didn't react. No tightening of the jaw, no glance upward. She adjusted her sling once, slow, deliberate, like the words hadn't landed at all. But they had. Staff Sergeant Brooke Callahan had learned long ago that silence could be armor if you wore it right. On paper, she was unremarkable. 28. Infantry support background. Assigned to marksmanship, logistics, and training cells more often than operational teams. Useful, reliable, forgettable. The kind of soldier leadership trusted to keep things running smoothly, but not the kind they bragged about. What the paper didn't show was the cost of a single word written 2 years earlier after a missed shot under pressure. Unreliable. Not inaccurate, not reckless, just unreliable. It followed her everywhere. She tried to scrub it away the honest way, extra training, perfect safety records, zero complaints. But reputations in the military didn't fade quietly. They stuck. And when people saw her now, they didn't see preparation. They saw doubt they didn't have to explain. The course wasn't a normal qualification. It was selective, observed, scored, remembered. The kind of place where people came to prove who they were. Or who they were. Brooke knelt behind her rifle and breathed low into her chest, feeling the wind slide across the range from right to left. She listened to it like a language, not guessing, reading. Wind never lied. Around her, confidence strutted openly. Nolan Pierce, broad shoulders, easy grin, leaned back and whispered to someone beside him, loud enough to carry. Support shop, huh? Guess we're short on real shooters. No one corrected him. She didn't look up. When her name was finally called, it came without urgency, as if remembered out of obligation rather than expectation. She stepped into her lane, slightly downhill, more exposed to crosswind, and settled in. She noticed everything. They noticed her noticing. Her first shot broke clean, steel rang. A second followed, another ring. The laughter behind her stalled mid-breath. Then the wind shifted. She adjusted instinctively and sent the round. The plate rang, but barely off-center. The instructor leaned in immediately. "Miss by standard," he said. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She corrected, fired again, hit. When the run ended, the feedback came sharp and public, tentative, inconsistent. She acknowledged it calmly and cleared her weapon with textbook precision. Inside, something tightened, not anger, something colder, familiar. She had felt this before, the quiet punishment of being watched harder than others, judged louder for smaller mistakes. But she also felt something else. Focus. And focus had always outlasted doubt. By the second evolution, the whispers had changed. Still there, but different, less amused, more curious. Shooters struggled, overcorrected, rushed, got reassured. When Brooke waited out a gust instead of firing, someone muttered about hesitation. Then she fired twice into the lull. 2 centered hits. No one laughed. Eli Vance noticed first. Not the hits, the posture. The way she let the rifle settle into her frame instead of fighting it. The way her dope card looked worn, handwritten, lived in. Like someone who had learned lessons when no one was watching. A scar flashed briefly at her wrist as she adjusted her grip. Old, clean. Not an accident. When her name was called again, the lane grew quiet, not respectful, uneasy. The wind worsened, time windows shrank. This was where stories usually ended. She waited. The timer beeped. She didn't shoot. Seconds passed, pressure built. Then the wind gave her a moment. She took it. Steel rang. Again. Again. Someone whispered, "She's on pace." The word spread without sound. Nolan's grin faded. Eli leaned forward without realizing it. An older instructor checked the board twice. No one said record out loud. They didn't need to. When the colonel stepped onto the range, his presence alone changed the air. He read the board, read it again, then looked at her. "Staff Sergeant Callahan," he said evenly. "Wardeck Province, Precision Overwatch." Her answer came steady, "Yes, sir." Understanding moved through the line like a delayed shockwave. Pulled from a role she hadn't failed. Silently reassigned. Quietly buried. The colonel nodded once. "Good to see you back where you belong." No applause followed. Just space. The final run began with wind at its worst. Brooke waited. Shot by shot, she used patience like a weapon, not fast, not slow. Correct. When the last round rang steel, the older instructor wrote the number without ceremony. The record fell without a sound. The salute that followed was clean, earned. Brooke returned it and packed her gear the same way she always had. She didn't look at the board. She didn't need to. Some people serve loudly, others carry their strength in silence. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands feel steadier now that everyone was finally watching? The cold had sharpened since her first run, the kind that crept past fabric and settled into joints without asking permission. Brooke Callahan flexed her fingers inside her gloves, not to warm them but to remind herself they still belonged to her. Sensation mattered. Awareness mattered. Everything else was noise. Behind the line, the range had changed its posture. People stood closer now. Not crowding, soldiers rarely crowded, but attentive in a way that pressed inward. Conversations that had once flowed easily now broke off when she shifted her weight or adjusted her kit. It wasn't respect yet. It was something more uncomfortable. Doubt turned inward. Brooke felt it without looking. She had learned to feel rooms the same way she felt wind, not emotionally, informationally. The instructors moved differently too, slower, more deliberate, like men recalibrating without admitting it. Master Sergeant Harkins didn't offer commentary as she prepped for the next evolution. He just watched, arms crossed, jaw set, a professional silence that carried more weight than his earlier criticism. Brooke preferred that. Silence didn't rush you. Silence didn't try to shape you into a lesson. The second phase of the course wasn't about raw accuracy anymore. Anyone here could hit steel. This phase punished impatience. It forced decisions under layered pressure, unknown distances, limited rounds, shifting winds that refused to cooperate long enough to be predictable. This was where reputations either hardened or cracked. Brooke had cracked once before. She remembered it clearly, even now. Different range, different team. Same cold in her chest when the spotter called a correction that didn't feel right. She had trusted him anyway, trusted the confidence instead of the data. The miss had been small, almost invisible, but in precision work, inches were verdicts. Unreliable. The word hadn't shouted. It had whispered itself into her file and waited. She pushed the memory aside, not burying it, just placing it where it belonged. Behind her, not ahead. Next rotation, Harkins called. Names followed, not hers yet. Brooke stayed where she was, kneeling, watching the mirage bend above the grass. She counted the rhythm of the wind in her head. Long push, short pause, false lull, repeat. Nolan Pierce shot before her again. He did well, clean hits, confident pace, but something had crept into his movements. A fraction of urgency that hadn't been there earlier. He chased one gust instead of letting it pass. Corrected late. still solid, still strong, but no longer effortless. When he finished, he glanced back toward Brooke without meaning to. She was still watching the range. Not him. That bothered him more than a miss would have. Eli Vance noticed it too. He'd shot thousands of rounds in training and operations, enough to recognize when someone stopped performing for themselves and started performing against someone else. Brooke wasn't competing. She was solving a problem. That difference mattered. When her name was finally called, it landed into the quiet like a test no one wanted to admit they were invested in. She moved forward with the same controlled pace, rifle balanced naturally against her body. No wasted motion. No attempt to look calm. She was calm. The lane assignment wasn't kind. Slight slope, crosswind funneled by terrain, the kind of place that magnified small errors into visible ones. Harkins didn't comment on it. He didn't need to. Everyone saw. Brooke knelt and began her setup. Rear bag placed, bipod legs adjusted by feel, not sight. She settled behind the rifle and let her weight sink until bone, not muscle, carried the load. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed. This was the space she trusted. The timer beeped. She waited. A murmur rippled behind her, soft, restrained. Someone mistook patience for uncertainty again. She let them. The wind surged unevenly, then eased just enough to reveal a pattern. Brooke sent her first round. Steel rang. She cycled the bolt smoothly, eyes never leaving the optic. The second shot followed in the same breath window. Another clean hit. The third shot was harder. The mirage bent differently, teasing a false correction. Brooke hesitated, not from fear but calculation. She remembered the old miss. The moment she had trusted noise instead of truth. She trusted herself this time. The shot struck just inside the edge. Hit. The instructor nearest her inhaled sharply, then caught himself. Harkins said nothing. As the evolution continued, other shooters struggled. One rushed and sent a round wide. Another froze too long and timed out. Corrections were offered. Encouragement followed. When Brooke adjusted mid-run, no one offered guidance. She didn't need it. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, not because she believed she couldn't fail, but because she had already failed once and survived it. That knowledge stripped fear of its power. When the run ended, she cleared her rifle and stood. No comment came immediately. Then Harkins spoke, his voice measured. Better, still conservative. She nodded, yes, Master Sergeant. Conservative had kept her alive once. She stepped back behind the line and knelt again, ignoring the weight building in her shoulders. The cold seeped deeper now. Fatigue layered itself into the day, subtle but relentless. This was the real test. Not accuracy. Endurance. Between rotations, the observers whispered more openly now, though still quietly. Brooke caught fragments without turning her head. Doesn't shoot like support. That patience isn't taught here. Name sounds familiar. She kept her eyes downrange. Recognition was dangerous. It could pull you out of yourself if you let it. The third evolution was announced with clipped instructions. Unknown distance, limited rounds, decision-making emphasized. This was where shooters revealed whether they trusted their instincts or panicked under the weight of responsibility. Brooke's stomach tightened just slightly. Not fear. Memory. This was where it had gone wrong before. She acknowledged it and moved on. When her turn came, she settled into position more slowly than earlier, checking alignment twice. The cold had stiffened her joints. She compensated without complaint. The first shot landed clean. The second followed. The third drifted just off. A miss. The sound of steel not ringing felt louder than any impact. Harkins reacted instantly. There, he said sharply, that's the hesitation. Brooke felt the words press into her chest. Old reflex urged explanation, context, defense. She ignored it. She reset, adjusted, fired again, hit, then another. She recovered not with speed but control, no visible frustration, no rushing to erase the mistake. Behind her, the whispers stopped entirely. Eli Vance exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. What struck him wasn't that she'd missed. It was that she hadn't fallen apart afterward. Most shooters did. That was the difference between competence and reliability. When the evolution ended, Brooke stood and cleared her weapon. Her face remained neutral, but inside something eased. Not pride. Relief. She had met the moment she'd once failed. Not perfectly, but honestly. As she stepped back, she felt it again, the shift in the air. People weren't watching her rifle now. They were watching her composure, watching how she carried disappointment. That was harder to fake than confidence. Nolan Pierce didn't look at her this time. His jaw was tight, eyes forward, like someone wrestling with a thought he didn't want to finish. The range grew quieter as the afternoon wore on. The wind grew meaner. Fatigue exposed small habits, fidgeting hands, rushed breaths, tightened shoulders. Brooke stayed the same. That sameness became its own statement. By the time the next evolution loomed, the unspoken question had changed. It was no longer, can she do this? It was, why didn't we see it sooner? Brooke knelt behind the line, hands resting lightly on her thighs, eyes half-lidded as she watched the flags twist against the sky. She felt the weight of the day settle into her bones, but she welcomed it. Pressure clarified things. It stripped away performance. What remained was truth. And the truth was simple. She didn't need anyone to believe in her. She only needed one more chance to prove she could believe in herself again. What happens when endurance turns into exposure, and there's nowhere left to hide? By mid-afternoon, the range no longer felt like a place of testing. It felt like a place of reckoning. The wind had grown erratic, no longer settling into readable patterns for long enough to feel polite. It snapped across the grass in sharp bursts, then vanished without warning. Mirage twisted like a living thing. Even the steel downrange looked different now, smaller somehow, darker, as if distance itself had decided to push back. Brooke Callahan felt the fatigue before she acknowledged it, a dull ache in her elbows, a faint stiffness in her neck where tension had crept in despite her efforts to keep it out. She rolled her shoulders once, slow and subtle, and let the discomfort exist without resisting it. Fighting your body only made it louder. Around her, the others were showing it more openly. A shooter flexed his hands too often. Another shook out his arms between runs, breathing just a little too hard. Confidence, when tired, had a way of leaking out through small cracks. Brooke stayed still. Stillness, she had learned, conserved more than energy. It conserved intention. The next evolution was announced without explanation. The instructors didn't need to spell it out. Everyone here understood the language of courses like this. When instructions grew shorter, expectations grew heavier. Unknown distances again, fewer rounds, narrower time windows. And observers who had stopped pretending they weren't watching. Brooke felt the weight of it settle in her chest, not as pressure but as responsibility. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It wasn't even about redemption, not really. It was about trust, the kind you earn without asking for it. The order was posted. Her name sat near the bottom again. Last. She noticed, she always noticed. She didn't react. Being last meant the wind would be worse, fatigue deeper, margin thinner. It also meant something else, something no one liked to admit. If she succeeded, there would be no excuses left. The first shooters went through the evolution with mixed results. One man rushed and burned 2 rounds chasing a correction that never came. Another hesitated too long and timed out, frustration bleeding into his posture as he cleared his weapon. Instructors offered clipped feedback, their patience thinning with the day. Brooke watched without judgment. She recognized herself in pieces of all of them. Nolan Pierce shot early again. His performance was good, strong, confident, but no longer dominant. He corrected aggressively, almost defiantly, as if daring the wind to challenge him again. It worked mostly. Mostly wasn't enough anymore. When he finished, he stood too quickly scanning faces for reaction. He didn't find what he was looking for. No nods, no grins. His eyes drifted, unwillingly, toward Brooke. She was kneeling, head slightly tilted, listening to the air. Eli Vance shot next. Clean, dependable, the kind of performance commanders liked because it didn't surprise them. When he finished, he didn't smile. He glanced toward Brooke's lane and then away, a flicker of something like anticipation crossing his face. He didn't know why he felt it. He just did. Between rotations, the civilian observer, Mr. Carden, stood near the board longer than necessary, tracing numbers with his eyes. The captain beside him leaned in and murmured something low. "Callahan," the captain said quietly, "where do I know that name from?" Mr. Carden didn't answer right away. "I'll check," he said finally. Brooke didn't hear the words, but she felt the attention shift again, tightening like a drawstring. She kept her breathing slow, steady. She had learned not to rush moments like this. They had a way of revealing things, whether you were ready or not. When her name was called, the range fell into that specific kind of quiet that wasn't commanded, only shared. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if aware it was being watched. Brooke stepped forward. She took her place in the last lane, the most exposed one, and began her setup. Her movements hadn't changed all day, and that consistency had become its own anchor. Rear bag placed, bipod adjusted, natural point of aim tested and retested. Harkins stood behind her again, closer this time. He didn't speak. Brooke appreciated that more than praise. The timer beeped. She waited. Seconds passed. This time, no one mistook it for hesitation. They had learned. The wind surged hard from the right, then faltered, then surged again. Brooke let it play itself out. She had no interest in fighting something stronger than her. She waited for cooperation. When it came, brief, imperfect, she took it. The first shot landed center. She cycled the bolt smoothly, breathing steady, and fired again before the lull disappeared. Another hit. The third shot was trickier. Distance revealed itself subtly, not through obvious signs but through the way the plate seemed to absorb light. Brooke adjusted by feel, not calculation. The shot struck just inside center. A quiet exhale rippled behind her. She continued. Not rushing, not stalling. Using the wind instead of reacting to it. At one point, a sudden noise broke the silence, an instructor calling a correction to another lane. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull attention. Brooke's focus wavered for half a heartbeat. The next shot drifted wide. Miss. The absence of steel ringing felt heavy, like a held breath released the wrong way. Harkins's voice cut in immediately. "That's the moment," he said. "You lose focus and you pay for it." The words landed harder than he intended. Brooke felt the old instinct flare again, the urge to shrink, to accept the narrative before it could harden. She killed it. She didn't look up. She reset. Adjusted. Fired again. Hit. Then another. She recovered not with defiance but with discipline. No visible frustration. No attempt to compensate emotionally. Behind the line, something shifted. It wasn't admiration. It was discomfort. People were starting to realize that their judgments hadn't just been premature, they had been wrong. Nolan Pierce felt it most sharply. The easy hierarchy he'd carried all day no longer held. Brooke wasn't outperforming him loudly. She was outlasting him quietly. That was worse. When the evolution ended, Brooke cleared her rifle and stood. Her breathing was controlled, but the fatigue had finally made itself known. Her shoulders rolled once, unconsciously, releasing tension. Harkins didn't criticize this time. He nodded. Just once. Brooke stepped back behind the line and knelt again, feeling the cold bite deeper now. Her fingers were stiff. Her legs ached. The day was taking its toll. She welcomed it. Fatigue stripped away ego. What remained was truth. As the range reset, the observers spoke more openly now, though still quietly. Brooke caught a fragment as she sipped water. She doesn't chase mistakes. That recovery is rare. She's not performing, she's operating. The words passed over her like wind. She didn't need them. The next evolution loomed, the hardest yet. Everyone knew it. This was the one designed to expose whoever was left, the one where mistakes multiplied and excuses died. Brooke closed her eyes briefly, not in prayer but in recalibration. She thought of the miss years ago, the trust she had placed in someone else's certainty, the way it had followed her ever since. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Not resentment. Release. If she failed now, it would be hers. And if she succeeded? She opened her eyes. The range stretched out before her, unforgiving and honest. She was ready. Not because she felt invincible, but because she had finally stopped being afraid of being seen. What if the moment that finally defines you arrives when you're too tired to pretend? The late afternoon light had flattened the range into muted colors, gray steel, dull grass, sky washed thin by wind and cold. Brooke Callahan felt the day in her bones now. Not the sharp fatigue of overexertion, but the deeper kind that crept in after hours of restraint. The kind that tested not strength, but honesty. This next evolution carried a weight one needed explained. It was the one instructors used when they wanted the truth. Not the polished truth, the unguarded one. Brooke rolled her neck once, slow and controlled, and settled back onto her heels. She took inventory the same way she always did when things mattered. Fingers stiff but responsive. Breathing steady. Focus intact, though narrower now, like a beam rather than a flood. Around her, the others were unraveling in small, human ways. One shooter cursed quietly after dropping a magazine. Another laughed too loud at nothing, the sound brittle. Nolan Pierce paced behind the line, gloves on, gloves off, then on again, as if he couldn't decide where to put his hands. Confidence, when exhausted, became restless. Eli Vance stood still, arms folded, eyes tracking the wind flags. He wasn't thinking about his own performance anymore. His attention kept drifting back to Brooke, drawn by something he couldn't name yet. The board was updated again. Numbers tightened. Margins shrank. Brooke didn't look at it. She never had. When the order was posted, her name was at the bottom again. Last. It should have felt like pressure. Instead, it felt like clarity. Last meant no one could distract her by shooting after her. No sudden noise from another lane. No shifting energy as people compared performances in real time. When she stepped forward, it would be into whatever the range had left. Truth unfiltered. The first shooters went. Some faltered immediately, their early confidence undone by fatigue. One man rushed 3 shots in quick succession, chasing a correction that never stabilized. Another hesitated too long, his indecision eating away his window until the timer ended the run for him. Instructors corrected without ceremony now. No encouragement, no cushioning. This was the deep water. Nolan Pierce stepped up with his jaw set and shoulders squared, trying to summon the version of himself that had arrived that morning. He shot well, but something essential was missing. His movements were just a fraction too sharp, his corrections just a fraction too aggressive. He was fighting the range instead of reading it. When he finished, he didn't look satisfied. He looked relieved. That was worse. Eli Vance followed and delivered another steady performance. Dependable, respectable. When he cleared his rifle, he glanced at the board and then quickly away, as if he didn't want to know how close the margins had become. Between rotations, Mr. Carden spoke quietly with the captain again, their heads bent together. Brooke noticed the way they both looked toward her lane afterward. Attention had weight. She felt it settle without letting it change her breathing. When her name was called, it didn't echo. It didn't need to. She stepped forward into the last lane, the wind biting harder here, the ground sloped just enough to demand compensation. She knelt, then lowered herself behind the rifle with a familiarity that bordered on intimacy, not affection. Trust. Harkins stood off her shoulder, closer than he'd been all day. He said nothing, but his presence was deliberate now, not dismissive. The timer beeped. Brooke waited. The wind surged hard, uneven, as if testing her patience one last time. She felt it brush her cheek, watched the mirage bend violently. This was not a condition you could overpower. She waited anyway. Somewhere behind her, someone shifted, then stilled again. When the gust eased, not gone, just readable, she fired. Steel rang. She cycled the bolt and held, letting the next wave pass. Another brief lull. Second shot. Hit. Her breathing remained low, controlled. Each inhale measured, each exhale purposeful. The rifle rested into her frame like it belonged there. The third shot was harder. Fatigue tugged at her arms. The slope pushed against her natural point of aim. She adjusted her rear support by a fraction, trusting muscle memory over calculation. She fired. Hit. A murmur rose and died. The fourth shot required a decision most shooters avoided when tired. Wait longer and risk the timer, or take the shot imperfectly and hope. Brooke waited. Not because she was brave. Because she was honest. When she fired, the steel rang again. Harkins's posture changed, not dramatically, just enough. The fifth shot was the hardest. The wind shifted mid-breath, subtle but punishing. Brooke felt it the way a sailor feels current, not with numbers, but intuition shaped by repetition. She paused, adjusted, fired. The impact landed solid. The timer ended the run. For a moment, no one spoke. Brooke stayed down behind the rifle until range safety called clear. She unloaded, locked the bolt back, and rose slowly, feeling the ache in her knees and shoulders without resentment. Harkins exhaled. It wasn't loud, but it was final. He didn't say anything yet. He just nodded once and stepped back. Behind the line, Nolan Pierce stared at the ground, jaw clenched, the last traces of his earlier confidence draining away. He wasn't angry. He was recalculating. Eli Vance realized something then that made his chest tighten. She wasn't chasing the record. She was setting a standard. As Brooke knelt again behind the line, fatigue pressed harder, but so did something else. Resolve. Not fierce, not dramatic. Quiet. The kind that came from knowing you had nothing left to prove, only something left to do. The board was updated again. The margins narrowed further. Whispers returned, but they were different now. She's on pace. If she holds. No one shoots like that this late. Brooke didn't close her eyes this time. She kept them on the range, watching the wind flags twitch against the sky. She felt the weight of every missed assumption that had led here, every label, every quiet dismissal. They no longer mattered. What mattered was simple. One more evolution remained. And when it came, there would be no hiding for anyone, not even the truth. What if the truth everyone avoids finally steps forward, and it knows your name? The wind didn't die down as the day stretched toward its end. If anything, it grew sharper, more erratic, like it resented being ignored. Brooke Callahan felt it scrape across her cheek as she knelt behind the line, her body heavy now in that familiar way that came only after hours of control. Not exhaustion that demanded rest. Exhaustion that demanded honesty. This was the evolution people remembered. Not because of the score. Because of what it revealed. The instructors didn't dress it up. They didn't soften the tone. Master Sergeant Harkins stood at the front of the line, eyes moving slowly from face to face, lingering just long enough to let the weight settle. "This run tells us who we can trust," he said. "Not who looks good, who's right." No one nodded this time. They understood. Brooke stayed still, hands resting loosely on her thighs. She felt the ache in her shoulders, the stiffness in her fingers. She welcomed it. Fatigue stripped away performance. It left only habit and choice. The order went up. Nolan Pierce mid-rotation again. Favorable lane, calmer window. Her name sat at the bottom. Last. A choice disguised as coincidence. Brooke noticed the way the captain observer traced the roster with his finger, paused at her name, then looked up toward the far end of the line. Mr. Carden stood beside him, clipboard tucked against his chest, posture unusually rigid. Something was moving behind the scenes now. Brooke didn't chase it. She never had. The first shooters went. One by one, the line exposed cracks. Fatigue had been patiently widening all day. A shooter who'd been sharp early now rushed his shots, breathing audible even from behind the line. Another froze mid-run, indecision bleeding seconds until the timer cut him off. Harkins corrected without comfort. Stop chasing it, read it, commit. Some did. Some couldn't. Nolan Pierce stepped up with his jaw set hard, shoulders squared like armor. He shot well, clean, fast, confident, but it felt forced now, like he was holding onto momentum instead of building it. His corrections came quicker than they needed to. His patience thinned. When he finished, his score was strong. Strong used to be enough. It wasn't now. He sat up and glanced toward the board, then away. His eyes found Brooke despite himself. She wasn't watching him. She was watching the wind, head tilted slightly, expression unreadable. That unsettled him more than any number could. Eli Vance shot next. Dependable as always, clean hits, measured pace. When he cleared his rifle, he didn't smile. He looked toward Brooke's lane, then back down range, like someone standing too close to an answer he wasn't ready to ask. Between rotations, Mr. Carden stepped away from the board and spoke quietly into his phone. His voice was low, but his posture betrayed urgency. The captain leaned in, listening, then straightened slowly. Brooke felt the shift before she saw it. Attention sharpened. When her name was called, it landed into silence. Not expectant. Tense. She stepped forward, boots crunching softly on frost-stiff grass. The last lane greeted her with everything it had left: crosswind, slope, fatigue. She knelt and began her setup with the same method she'd used all day. Rear support placed. Bipod set. Breathing lowered. Harkins stood behind her again, closer than before. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The timer beeped. Brooke waited. The wind surged hard from the right, uneven, impatient. Mirage twisted violently. Several people shifted behind the line, expecting her to rush. She didn't. She let the gust pass. Let the next one lie. When the air gave her a narrow window, she took it. The first shot rang steel, clean and centered. She cycled the bolt and waited again. No rush, no panic. Second shot, another clean hit. The murmur behind her rose and died in the same breath. The third shot demanded judgment. The distance played tricks now, the plate absorbing light in a way that blurred certainty. Brooke adjusted not by calculation, but by feel, years of repetition compressed into instinct. She fired. Hit. Eli Vance took a half step forward without realizing it. This wasn't training course shooting. This was operational. Brooke continued, shot by shot, using the wind instead of fighting it, letting patience do the work most people tried to force. When a gust threatened to steal a window, she waited it out, even as seconds slipped away. Time wasn't the enemy. Panic was. At one point, a shot landed just off-center, still a hit, but imperfect enough to remind everyone she was human. Brooke adjusted calmly and fired again. Another hit. Harkins opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. He stayed silent longer than anyone had seen him stay silent all day. At the board, the older instructor leaned in, traced the numbers with a finger, then did it again. His brow furrowed. He checked the previous record, written in neat black ink from a class years ago, a standard that had quietly become legend. He looked up, eyes flicking between the board and Brooks Lane. Then he whispered to Mr. Carden. "What's her running total?" Mr. Carden hesitated, then answered. "She's on pace." "Not close." "On pace." The words moved through the line like a slow shockwave. Nolan Pierce heard them. His posture changed instantly, shoulders tightening, chin lifting as if struck by the idea. The smirk he'd worn all morning was gone. Fear replaced it. Not fear of failure. Fear of being wrong. Brooke didn't look up. She didn't react. She kept doing what she had done all day, making correct decisions under pressure, one at a time. Her final shots landed with the same controlled rhythm. When the timer ended the run, she held position for a heartbeat longer, then cleared her rifle and stood. No celebration. No relief. Just completion. Harkins stared downrange, then at the board, then back at her. His expression had changed, not softened but recalibrated. Before he could speak, boots crunched behind the line. Slow, deliberate. A senior officer stepped forward from the observers, a colonel, silver threaded at his temples, uniform unadorned, the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command space. The range went still. He walked the length of the line without speaking, eyes scanning targets, wind flags, shooters. He stopped at the board and studied it in silence. Once, twice. Then he turned and looked toward Brooke Callahan. She met his gaze calmly. "Staff Sergeant Callahan," he said, voice level. "Wardeck Province, precision overwatch." It wasn't a question. Brooke felt the words land in her chest, not as a blow, but as a release. "Yes, sir." Something broke open in the silence behind her. "Understanding." The colonel nodded once. "I remember the reports," he said, "sparse, clean, no wasted motion." He glanced downrange, then back at her. Same habits. Brooke said nothing. He turned to Harkins. "You didn't brief me she'd be here." "She was qualified, sir," Harkins replied carefully. "That wasn't the question." Harkins nodded once, accepting it. The colonel faced Brooke again. "You were removed from that role after an incident that wasn't yours to own." "Yes, sir." The range felt like it was holding its breath. The colonel nodded again. "Good to see you back where you belong." That was all. No applause followed. It wasn't needed. Brooke inclined her head once in acknowledgement and stepped back behind the line, her expression unchanged. Around her, faces had shifted. Assumptions had collapsed quietly, without ceremony. The truth had stepped forward. And it had known her name. What does victory look like when the noise finally disappears? The range didn't erupt after the colonel stepped back. There was no applause, no exhale of celebration, no sudden release of sound the way people expected moments like this to end. The quiet that followed was heavier than anything that had come before it. Not awkward, not uncertain. Settled. Brooke Callahan felt it press around her as she knelt behind the line, hands resting loosely on her thighs. Her pulse was steady now, slower than it had been all day. The fatigue was still there, deep, honest, but it no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. The truth had surfaced, and truth, once spoken, changed the shape of a room. The colonel remained just behind the instructors, his presence calm but undeniable. He didn't hover. He didn't intrude. He simply watched as if he wanted to see what came next when no one was pretending anymore. Master Sergeant Harkins cleared his throat quietly and stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was professional and even. Final run. No qualifiers, no drama. Just the task. The targets were reset. Wind flags snapped sharply, refusing to offer comfort. The numbers on the board remained untouched, waiting. The record still stood, barely, but now it felt different. No longer a legend. No longer a distant thing written in ink. It was close enough to touch. Brooke rose and stepped forward when her name was called, moving with the same deliberate pace she had all day. Nothing in her posture suggested she felt the moment more heavily than before. If anything, she looked lighter now, as if something she had carried for years had finally been set down. She took her place in the lane and lowered herself behind the rifle. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, not comforting, trustworthy. Behind her, Nolan Pierce stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the ground. His confidence hadn't shattered, it had simply quieted, stripped of its performance. He didn't look angry. He looked reflective in a way he wasn't used to being. Eli Vance stood at attention without realizing it, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Brooke's lane. Not with awe, with recognition. He understood now. The timer beeped. Brooke waited. The wind surged hard from the right, uneven and impatient. Mirage bent sharply. Someone behind the line shifted, then froze, remembering. She didn't rush. She adjusted her rear support by a fraction, exhaled slowly, and let the gust burn itself out. The range felt suspended in that moment, as if even the steel downrange was waiting. When the air settled, just enough, she fired. The sound of the impact was clean and unmistakable. She cycled the bolt smoothly and waited again. Another breath, another lull. Second shot. Centered. The older instructor at the board stiffened, eyes flicking down to the numbers and back up again. He said nothing. Brooke adjusted slightly, accounting for barrel temperature and the subtle shift she felt more than saw. She didn't rush the third shot. She didn't stall either. She fired. Hit. The echo rolled back across the range like confirmation. The record trembled. Time ticked quietly now, no longer an enemy, just a boundary. Brooke treated it the way she treated everything else that day, with respect, not fear. The fourth shot demanded patience most shooters didn't have at this stage. The wind teased a false lull, tempting her to take the shot early. Brooke recognized it for what it was. She waited half a second longer. Then fired. Steel rang again. A ripple moved through the line, subtle but undeniable. Not excitement, realization. The fifth shot was the hardest. Fatigue tugged at her arms. The wind shifted mid-cycle, a slight change that punished hesitation and arrogance alike. Brooke felt it brush her cheek, read the mirage one last time, and made a choice that wasn't flashy. It was correct. She fired. The impact landed solid, centered enough to leave no doubt. The timer beeped. For a long moment, no one spoke. Brooke remained in position until range safety called clear. She unloaded, locked the bolt back, and stepped away from the rifle. She rolled her shoulders once, more from habit than relief. The older instructor stepped forward, pen hovering over the board. He checked the totals once, then again. His throat worked as he swallowed. He wrote the final number. It was enough. The record was broken. Still, there was no cheer. The realization moved through the group quietly like a wave passing under still water. Faces softened, jaws unclenched, people breathed again. Master Sergeant Harkins approached Brooke slowly. He stopped a pace away, studied her for a moment, then raised his hand. A formal salute. Clean, precise, earned. Brooke returned it without hesitation, posture straight, eyes forward. The exchange lasted only a heartbeat, but it carried more weight than any speech. The colonel nodded once from behind the line, a small motion that didn't seek attention, but held it anyway. Nolan Pierce stared at the ground, jaw tight, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. His silence said what words couldn't. Eli Vance felt something settle in his chest, a quiet gratitude he hadn't expected, not for the record, for the reminder. After the range went cold, Brooke did what she had always done when a task was finished. She packed her rifle with care, wiped down the metal where frost had settled, and folded her sling the same way she always had. She didn't look at the board. She didn't linger at the targets. When someone offered a quiet congratulations, she nodded once and said thank you, then returned to her checklist. Her voice didn't change. Her posture didn't soften. The range slowly came back to life around her, but it was different now. Conversations were quieter. Jokes, if they came at all, were careful. A few soldiers stood apart, staring out at the steel, as if trying to understand how easily they had misread someone standing right in front of them all day. Brooke helped carry equipment without being asked. She checked a loose strap on a case that wasn't hers. She moved through the routine like the record had never existed. Because in her mind, it hadn't been the point. The range would remember the number written on that board. But the people there would remember something else entirely. The way restraint held under pressure. The way humility walked away without asking to be seen. Because real courage doesn't announce itself. It simply does the work. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.